Okay. All right, good morning, everyone. Today's a special day where we get to welcome a friend of mine, in front of many actually, as our visitor to deliver the annual Kirby Bland lecture. Monica Bertagnolli is a native of Wyoming, actually grew up not far from where Greg Kennedy grew up, and went to undergraduate at Princeton, and went to medical school at Utah, and then was recruited to Boston, where she did her surgical training at the Brigham. And while she was at the Brigham, she did a fellowship in tumor immunology at the Dana-Farber. After finishing and being the assistant chief of service at the Brigham, she was recruited to Cornell, where she spent 4 or 5 years on the faculty, quickly was promoted to associate professor, and then was recruited back to the Brigham, where she rose up through the ranks, taking major leadership positions both at the institution as the chief of surgical oncology and also at the Dana-Farber. And then was recruited to be the director of the 16th director of the National Cancer Institute. And it was at that time, to give you a little background, we invited Monica to come. This was in the works for 18 months. Trying to get on her schedule, and then obviously a lot of stuff happened in the interim after the invitation, including a nomination by President Biden to be the director of the NIH in May, a confirmation on November 7th, and then she took the position on November 9th. And but she told me she fought to make sure that this visit stayed on her calendar, even though she was told she had to clear her calendar, but she said, no, I want to come visit UAB. In addition to obviously being the director of the NIH, she's done some fantastic things. She's done all the surgical things that you might imagine being a leader in surgery, but what's most impressive is that she was able to take major leadership positions outside the field of surgery, such as being president of the Alliance and the presidents of the American Society of Clinical Oncology. So I want you all to join me to welcome our friend Monica Bertagnolli as our visiting professor today.
Wow, so you're right, Herb. I really did not want to miss this this meeting. You know, this is my first visit to Birmingham, and which is shocking to me because I have so many friends here and so many colleagues that we worked with through the Alliance and other activities over the years, and so I'm just thrilled to be able to be here. And I'm going to try and not talk too long because the best part is the discussion and questions. So, excuse me. Think about what you want to ask me. Okay, let's see. See if I can, see if I can manage the slides. I see slides on here, but not on there. Oh, there we go. Okay, good. So just a few things. I'm going to introduce myself, talk about some concerns that we have overall in health, a little bit about overall NIH guiding principles, and really an introduction. And, you know, I was asked maybe to gear this toward an audience of more trainees, junior people who are thinking maybe for the first time of getting involved in research and how that happens at NIH. So let me just say, I also want to thank you so much. Geez, excuse me a second. Okay, better now. I want to thank Dr. Agarwal, the Dean of the School of Medicine here, for also this kind invitation, and also Dr. Ray Watts, the President of the University of Alabama at Birmingham, for the wonderful events and day that we have for our visit. So, I'm in trouble getting the slides to advance. Maybe I'll try this. Yeah, will that work? Okay, good, we're off. When I was invited here, I was asked to talk a bit about my journey from a surgical oncologist to become NIH director. Indeed, I spent most of my career as a surgical oncologist and researcher in Boston before joining the NIH in the fall of 2020 as the director of the National Cancer Institute. I always admired NIH and all it does to advance fundamental research and improve clinical care. And I was drawn to the idea of leading a place where everyone had only one job: to improve the health of all people. It really is a unique environment. And I didn't realize until I came to NIH myself the difference in being in a place where that is your sole goal. You know, in academia, there are so many pressures from so many different directions. You're taking care of people. You have people's lives in your hands every single day. It's very different to be in an environment where, of course, people's lives are your highest concern, but all you focus on is how to make life better for them and not have all of the other challenges of being in the environment of a really large academic medical center. The top two photos, top two photos are of my family's ranch in Wyoming. This is where I grew up. You can see it is a long way away from anywhere. It is 100 miles, where I grew up, 100 miles to the nearest hospital, 100 miles to the nearest doctor's office. When I went to school, my mom would move, when school started, we'd move 100 miles to the town and in the fall to go to school, and then we'd come back and forth on the weekends until the snow got too high, and then the whole family would move to the small town on the southwestern corner of Wyoming. But it was a very, very different life, and I think it really has stayed with me my entire career. I really decided I wanted to be a doctor because I was inspired by my uncle. My uncle was a primary care physician who was a frontier doctor in Wyoming. He was a Veterans Administration physician. He took care of veterans across the entire state. When I was in medical school, I did a rotation with my uncle. He delivered babies. He pinned hips. He diagnosed a farmer who fell off his tractor and got a subdural hematoma. And you know, everything else you might imagine, being in a place where you are the only doctor within 100 miles. So it was a really amazing introduction to what can happen even in our country. I studied chemical engineering and biochemistry in college. I was very interested in applying biochemical principles to medicine at a time before there were no bioengineering degrees when I was in college. And in medical school, I was really interested in immunology. It was just such a fascinating subject, and I wanted to be an immunologist. I took my surgery rotation first because I wanted to get it over with and get on with what I really wanted to do. And I am sure almost every surgeon in this room knows what I'm talking about. I walked into an operating room, and that was it. I just realized the first time I walked into an operating room, oh my God, this is where I belong. Surgeons are born, not made. And so I decided I had to pursue a career in surgery. During my residency, I spent years conducting research in tumor immunology at Dana-Farber and went on to study the inflammatory response as a driver of tumorigenesis associated with APC gene mutation. And really interesting interaction between that particular mutation and its effects on epithelial tissues and the ability of inflammation to promote tumors in that setting. And as a surgeon, I'm sure you all recognize this, we can have incredible benefits to our patients by removing tumors, but all of us know that's just not enough. I will never forget the time as a senior resident, when up at the Brigham we were doing some of the first IL-2 therapies, to see a disseminated melanoma melt away and not return, one of the very, very first successes in immunotherapy. And I will also say that even most recently, just right before I came to NCI, being with one of my own patients who had a widely disseminated sarcoma, seeing that tumor completely melt away and never come back. It happened to have a track fusion, and we were able to identify that particular protein as also being something that could be targeted effectively. So wonderful to be a surgeon, also wonderful to be part of the science that can also produce these effects for people who are far beyond our care. Soon after I became NCI director, just 5 weeks, frankly, I was diagnosed with early breast cancer. That was a shock. And NCI director, I decided to be very public about it. I'm not I'm not a terribly private person anyway. And the reason that it was important to me is it was important to me to participate in clinical trials myself and to realize that all of the treatment that I've received, which I say my prognosis is excellent, but I look at every single bit of treatment I've received, every single treatment was the result of an NIH-funded clinical trial, beginning in the 1970s with the early work to move from radical mastectomies to radiotherapy and cosmetic surgery for breast cancer, and realizing that also all of the women who participated in the clinical trials that produced the care that I was able to receive. So I'm incredibly grateful to the science, and I'm also equally grateful, perhaps even more grateful, to all the women who participated in that research to make it possible for me to have such a great result. So let me just end by saying my life experiences, I think, have given me such a powerful sense of the transformative potential of research, but also the critical importance of access and equity by all people to research and its benefits. So a few things that I think are very, very concerning. The overall health of the U.S. population is not getting better. It's definitely going in the wrong direction. Here's one good example. Our life expectancy is much lower than our comparator nations. This is not new. This has been happening. This has been getting worse over a decade. It started in about 2013, 2014 that we started seeing this decline. So it is not a pandemic era issue, and it has improved a little bit since the pandemic, but not enough to catch up. So it is actually overall still getting worse. And our life expectancy is very low compared to peer nations who spend far less on healthcare than we do. So think about this. If we're spending this much on healthcare, but we're that much worse in life expectancy, it means we're spending an awful lot of money on stuff that's not helping anybody, right? It's no other way to think about it. So what are we going to do better for people? And this is one way that I think we at NIH can't ignore. Although it's wonderful to focus on the science, which is very exciting and transformative, and we will not let up on, this is another issue that we at NIH cannot ignore. There was a report from 2021. This is now with data that ended in 2019, so this is only much, much worse than it was then, that shows that the main drivers of this trend in mortality is an increase in deaths related to drug poisonings, alcohol-related causes, and suicides, and also a slowing in progress that we had been making for cardiometabolic disease, basically obesity, really starting to catch up with us. And so the report authors described this as a national population health crisis and a trend that threatens the future of families and the social fabric of communities, as well as the productivity and competitiveness of our country. So this really is a national health crisis. I see two major challenges that NIH needs to respond to. This is one that has bothered me for a long time. The doctor sitting at the bedside doesn't really have great evidence to guide the decisions that have to be made in clinic every day. I mean, all of our training, all of our experience undoubtedly is critical and helps us take good care of our patients. But when we really look at the evidence that we're using, especially in this really complicated world, it's not so good. This is an analysis from the field of oncology that a review of the NCCN guidelines, this is back in 2019, showed little or no change, frankly, over the past decade. This has been true for more than 15 years. Only 7% of recommendations were supported by randomized controlled trials. This is for all of oncology across all NCCN guidelines. Only 7% had clinical randomized trial guidelines. Most were from observational trials or very early phase trials, and this hasn't gotten any better. So think about this. These are the decisions that you make every single day, and how weak, frankly, the evidence base is to help guide them. And this is only worse the more complex these decisions become. And here's another big issue, and this one I think is also critical. When we look over the evidence that we have, data is especially lacking for particular populations, such as those here. And the data, these are the populations where we don't have data. These are exactly the same populations that have the worst outcomes. No surprise. So we don't know how to help people in this category, and they are overlooked in our research enterprise. We have to fix this. So what can NIH do? We are absolutely committed to tackling this problem with data, with science, with evidence. Here is a very important guiding principle. At NIH, we seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and strive to apply that knowledge to improve health for all. But among the guiding principles we have at NIH, the very first one is that our work is not finished when we deliver scientific discoveries. Our work is only finished when all people are living long and healthy lives. And that is a commitment that we at NIH make. NIH research also encompasses the laboratory, the clinic, and this is one that I don't think is always articulated, the community, okay? If we are going to have an impact, and I know you all know this because major academic medical centers came to this before I think we articulated it at NIH. Our work also has to encompass the communities we serve. And a critical feature of that is that patients are truly partners in everything we do. And we take this very seriously, and this attitude permeates the strategies and initiatives that we have ongoing at NIH. I want to be clear that fundamental science remains critical. We absolutely cannot let up on the basic science, the fundamental science that is fueling all of the incredible advances that we see now, and we cannot let up on that in any way. But when that information comes in, we need to do much better at connecting those results to the people that we serve. To understand the interplay between the genes that we inherit and the environmental and societal factors that also influence health. We need to connect that knowledge to everyday life and to clinical practice so that all people can live longer and healthier lives. We need to make sure that biological insights identified in laboratories are pursued in ways that speed their application to improve the circumstances of real people. I think we leave too much knowledge at the interface between the laboratory and the clinic. And our clinical research needs to be robust and comprehensive and benefit everyone. This means our studies need to be efficient, inclusive, and responsive to the actual needs of patients. So another principle that we have is that progress is accelerated when advanced scientific methods such as new data analytics are applied to data that includes everyone, and when new discoveries are rapidly and equitably adopted in clinical care. So new advances in information technology and data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence methods have been used by the scientific community. Certainly a team at NIH has been working in this area for more than a decade and a half. But now these methods have all of a sudden captured everyone's attention. Why? Because there are now large language models that are available for everyone to use. So all of a sudden they're getting a lot of attention. But we really have a deep grounding in being able to use these methods. But our knowledge and technology have developed to the point where we should be able to deliver evidence-based, data-driven care to every single patient. We have the technology. What we don't have yet is the health system that will let us do that. Artificial intelligence is already revolutionizing what is possible for biomedical research and clinical care. But to realize its potential for improving health, we need to invest in a secure and inclusive and sustainable data sharing infrastructure. I'm not going to talk about this a lot today, but I can tell you that that data sharing infrastructure that engages everyone is a major initiative underway at NIH. Whoops. Okay. Here's another way we can maybe make some advances on these critical problems we have facing the nation. As NIH director, I think we can do a lot by pushing to better integrate patient care with research. We want every clinic to be a learning environment. I especially want research to reach the primary care community. I want us all to extract better information from data to inform care, and that means getting into the care environment. We need to engage underrepresented communities by meeting people where they already receive care. And what we haven't done yet, but we can do in a very dedicated way, is to support more primary care providers in these communities, allowing them to both contribute the knowledge to knowledge generation and at the same time deliver better care. Using innovative study designs, we can increase research capabilities and address urgent health issues like metabolic disorders, mental health, substance use, and disease prevention. We can better understand what works in terms of implementation. And study designs for this new network include pragmatic trials, platform protocols, cluster randomization trials, and observational studies that use modern data analysis methods. It is really exciting when you think about what we can accomplish if we finally put all of these tools and technologies and methods that we have into more of these clinics that are on the front lines of healthcare. Recognizing that healthcare providers have incredible demands on their time, we also must use health information technology to engage people in research with their permission and to dramatically reduce the burden of data collection. And we have pilots underway right now that are very exciting, showing that we can do this. The goal of this initiative is to make sure that busy primary care providers in really challenging communities can deliver evidence we need to learn while still delivering even better health care and with a more effective and better way of living, of getting through their day than what they have now. And I am very confident that we can do that. I envision a data-driven system in which research insights from patient care are constantly informing one another. So now let me shift gears a little bit and give you some information, perhaps for those of you who are not so familiar with NIH, on how we operate. NIH is made up of 27 institutes and centers listed here. Each has its own mission, its own budget, priorities, leadership, and its own funding strategy. These really are pretty independent entities. Most conduct research themselves, as well as and all of them fund research throughout the country and even throughout the world. In fiscal year 2023, the NIH budget was $47.3 billion, making us the largest funder of biomedical research in the world. The vast majority of the budget is spent outside of the NIH on grants to researchers at universities, medical schools, and other scientific institutions. Research conducted by NIH scientists total about 11% of the NIH budget. And let me remind you that the NIH, the intramural budget, that 11%, is focused on doing the kind of research that cannot be done anywhere else. If it can be done by the extramural community, it goes out to the extramural community. What does NIH do with that 11%? It's the clinical center, which has championed TIL, tumor-infiltrating lymphocyte therapy, for cell-based immunotherapy of solid tumors, which I'm very proud to say Dr. Rosenberg's team have achieved their first FDA approval for solid tumors last week. So a surgeon colleague with more than 3.5 decades of work, back when I was a resident watching that initial melanoma melt away, has now been able to achieve this completely innovative, only Stephen could do this, new FDA-approved treatment. So obviously we are incredibly proud of our surgeon colleague in the clinical center. That's an example of something that NIH can do, nobody else can, but there are many others. We do a lot of work on rare conditions. Gene therapies for inborn errors of metabolism. Gene therapies, we have a brand new approval, drug approval of a sickle cell gene therapy coming out of the intramural program. I think it's worthwhile to describe what happens there just to illustrate how unique it is compared to what happens in the extramural community. And then you see 6.69 is research support. These are all the review committees, all of our leadership teams, all of the people who process the grants, all of our websites. And I will say, when you go to the NIH websites and they're a little clunky and they're not the fanciest thing you've ever seen, that's because we're spending the money on the extramural community, not on making fancy websites, okay? But we're hoping that they work for you. To decide where the funding goes, let me just do next and go by the numbers. NIH extramural program recruits, we recruit 28,000 reviewers every year to comb through more than 80,000 funding applications we receive every year. We end up making, last year, 11,300 awards, spread out in all 50 states and the District of Columbia, as well as some in other countries. More than 2,800 institutions receive NIH funding, and we support about 12,000 graduate students, more than 28,000 postdocs, and a community of approximately 350,000 researchers in all. And we have supported the work of 169 Nobel Prize winners. We were able to have a celebration at the NIH Clinical Center last week of Dr. Harvey Alpert of his 2020 Nobel Prize for the identification of the virus that caused hepatitis C. It was really a wonderful, that was an NIH Nobel Prize that came in the middle of the pandemic. Everyone kind of forgot about it, and we were finally able to have a celebration of Harvey last week. It was great. So, most of the research that NIH supports is investigator-initiated, meaning that we don't tell you what we're looking for. We ask everybody to give us their very best ideas. Submit applications on the topic of your choice. However, NIH also issues notices to solicit applications in response to specific scientific areas. Funding decisions are based on merit, opportunity, public health need, and the current portfolio of other funded work. So there is some balancing that goes on. This map shows where funding goes across the country. Institutions in Alabama received almost $360 million in NIH funding in the last fiscal year. If you're interested in browsing the projects that we fund, you can visit the searchable database at the website reporter.nih.gov. It might be helpful to run through the research funding process at NIH. A researcher initiates the process with a grant proposal, proposing either a new project or to continue an existing one. The proposal goes to a scientific review panel at one of the NIH institutes or centers, which conducts the first level peer review, evaluating the scientific merit of the proposal. The panel's evaluation goes to a program officer who works at NIH, who helps interpret the review results. The program officer is also the main contact for the applicant. And I can't say this strongly enough. We encourage all researchers to contact their program officers early and get to know them in the process of developing their grant proposals. They are here to help you. And understand, they see what's coming in from everywhere. And so who better to give you advice on how to make your work as fundable as possible? You can discuss your proposal idea, whether it is a likely fit or priority area for a particular institute and center. Sometimes they'll say, don't put it here, but we happen to know of another place where the opportunities will be brighter. And they may steer you into a particular type of grant or funding opportunity because they know what's out there. Review results are gathered together for a second peer-level review by an institute's National Advisory Council. This is a public board of advisors. The final decisions are not public, but you can always tune in to what the board is thinking about, discussing, and considering, because these public boards guide what every single institute is able to accomplish. And they look at all the proposals collectively to assess the programs and improve the applications. The final approval, though, rests with each institute director, who signs off on projects, allocates funds, and provides an annual justification to Congress for continued funding. Another thing important to realize, our funding is year by year. We have to spend everything we get. And if we don't have a budget, we don't have any money at all for the next year. As you know, we're all eagerly anticipating our 2024 budget. We are allowed to go forward by Congress on a continuing resolution, which means keep it low while we're arguing over what your budget really will be. But our budget happens year by year by year. So those of you who have your grants with 5 years of funding, think about that. If the budget goes down, we don't have your 5 years of funding. And you will all see this happen. It's tragic. It's really, and I'm sorry to say, we're going to see this happen this year, where you've been funded for 5 years of funding at X amount, and we have to come to you in year 3 and say, I'm sorry, you're only going to get 90% of what you asked for. Why? That's because we get our money year by year, and we didn't get enough money to cover the out years. So just so you know, that's how it happens. And then also to remind you that, again, the funding year by year comes from Congress. I know you've all been watching the news. We're going to have to make some really tough decisions this year, I think, because of our funding situation. So, but we will do our best according to our mission. Okay, so current funding opportunities. Take a look at NIH Reporter. It's a very helpful site to get to know. It's got lots of information there about what various centers project, funding by state. And there is a really great little tool there called Matchmaker to help researchers find grant opportunities for what you're interested in. The other thing that's important is to think we have many, many different grant types. And by the way, we struggle with these every single year. Is this grant type delivering what we need it to deliver? Is it really helping the community? I will tell you right now, I'll give you a little clue. We are very, very concerned over postdoc funding and how we are, we feel that our postdocs have been in many places underfunded. How are we going to make sure that postdocs are being able to support it with the salaries and benefits that they need? And so we're going back to all these funding mechanisms and thinking now, is there a better way to support postdocs? That's just one example of the discussions that occur, and we struggle with every single week. These topics come up in all of our discussions, and we sometimes look to our academic presidents for advice on the best ways to format the funding, because our goal obviously is to get it to you. One last thing I will say is that early stage investigators are a priority. At a time like this, when we're going to have a bad budget year, the people who get hurt are the early investigators and the young people. It's really not the well-established scientists at the top of their career. Frankly, they can be pretty resilient. It's the young researchers that get hurt the worst. So I will tell you, in a tough funding year, our priority is going to go to early stage investigators and trainees to keep them funded and supported. So there is a preference to early stage investigators, and you can see on the slide here who qualifies for that. And then, I think you all know this, it's pretty simple, but you'd be surprised at how it's worth a look. What's better scored, what's worse scored? People will say, it's the study sections don't reward innovation. They just want the boring stuff that they already. Actually, that's not entirely true. Really innovative projects that are very well defended and supported really are the ones that get funded. That they do have to have relevant, supportive preliminary data and a clear approach, but those are the ones that tend to be better funded. And I will tell you that in the study sections, sometimes they're looking for the sure bet. But when it gets to those other levels of review at NIH, the institute directors are looking for innovation. So that's something to remember. And then I'm just going to end up with a few words here. As you develop your own research vision, don't forget the importance of team science. Decide as early as you can to build your team of mentors, colleagues, and trainees. These are the treasures throughout your career, because your career is going to come and go. I mean, your fortunes during your career will ebb and flow. Having close relationships with your colleagues and mentors, many of them. I can't count the number of wonderful mentors I've had throughout my career. Dr. Bland has been one of them, thank you. And so, they're the ones that make your career worthwhile and to sustain them. Remember, it's about the people and the mission. And so don't forget the people part of it. That is absolutely critical. Another little bit of advice. Those of you who are in clinical care, your patients are always your highest priority, right? You're going to sacrifice doing a bench experiment if your patient needs you. That's just where we all have to be. So there will be times when your work, perhaps, if you are an active clinician, your research might take a back seat. This clearly has happened to me during my career. But one thing I never did, and I recommend that anyone interested in science never do, I never stopped going to lab meeting. I never stopped reading the scientific journals in my field. No matter what, keep your mind engaged. And the best is never stop going to lab meeting. And if you don't have a lab meeting yet, find one. You'd be surprised if you go up to someone who you've listened to a really great lecture and you're really interested in the work that they're doing. If you call them up and say, can I just listen in on your lab meeting? I can't imagine anyone who would say no. It is, it's actually very flattering to have someone want to listen in on your lab meeting. And the things that go on in lab meeting are the best of science. You see the things that go wrong, you see the things that are going well. So, and I can tell you now, people ask me, are you still doing research? No, but I go to lab meeting. And I go to lab meeting every single week because that's what keeps me going. And that's just the last thing I will just say. My last bit of advice, always follow the mission, which is really making life better for those that we serve, and stick with the people, both your patients and your colleagues. So thank you very, very much. I'd love to hear your questions, and I really want to thank you so much for this wonderful, warm visit. I'm so thrilled to be here with you today. For you.
Monica, that was fantastic.
Thank you.
So I know she particularly told me she loves to take questions. I'll start with one, and hopefully we'll get some people's hands up in the audience, and we had a few submit in advance.
Okay, excellent.
So you were you've been many firsts. You're the first woman to head NCI, first surgeon to head the NIH, second woman to head NIH. And so a couple questions asked about what was it like to do that, and what advice would you give young people on trailblazing?
Yeah, so I also trained in surgery in the 1980s when there weren't very many women in surgery, which was another issue. And I also came from Wyoming. I came to Princeton from Wyoming. I'd never even been there. So I have been an odd duck my entire career, and what the one best advice I can give you is it is just fine to be an odd duck. Don't feel like you've got to fit in. Now, absolutely feel like your presence there needs to bring excellence, and your presence there needs to bring benefit to where you are. But don't make the mistake of thinking, I have to fit in and be like everybody else. Because that it's not only the key to your own mental stability, frankly, and your own well-being, it is also the very best way to bring benefit to where you are. So that's how I feel about being first.
Okay. Craig.
Thanks for a great talk. Craig Powell, UAB Chair of Neurobiology, basic scientist. My question is, a lot of the health and lifespan problems, politics and economic models aside, stem from what I perceive to be cultural things that are very hard to change. And at UAB, we're doubling and tripling down on community engagement, thanks to Ray Watts, our president, Mona Fawad, Anupam Agarwal, Irf Assam. Anyway, and that's going very well, yet our culture doesn't shift very rapidly or in a very directed manner. Help us understand how NIH can help to change the culture of our communities and society as a whole, through research, of course, evidence-based cultural change, which is what I think is going to fix the only fix to some of these problems, as you mentioned.
Yeah, boy, this is a question we think about a lot. Okay, I'll give you the most glaring example, vaccine avoidance. There's a culture that we have to hopefully do something about. So clear to us who think about the data that, you got, we're seeing measles now, It's so clear to us the risk benefit, yet we have communities, very intelligent, well-meaning communities who are absolutely convinced that that's the wrong thing to do. Right? And so the first and foremost thing we have to is to respect them and to include them. Include them. Don't say, well, you're vaccine avoidant, so we don't want anything to do with you. Include them. There is some form, and when we're working on this right now, actually, NIAID is working on a project for, people who are avoiding vaccines. Okay, we might not want to include them in the next vaccine trial, but we can include them in other aspects of infection control, include them as research participants, respecting their deeply held belief right now, and make progress in like a parallel area that brings them into real participation in research and improving health. So don't fight them, but try to find a way that what we're doing brings clear benefit to them, and something that they have picked that is a benefit that they want to see. It could be about, they might be vaccine avoidant, but they want help with smoking cessation. Or they might be, or they might have, they have challenges with, any of the other concerns. You could find many. So that's what we're working on. The other thing I will say is that these communities, we at NIH can't get these. The only people who could get to these communities are you, those who actually work and live in these communities. This is why we're trying so hard to stand up this new primary care research network, because we see this primary care network as the point of access. So I know I'm going on too long and we won't be able to have questions, but I just want to plug for this. What we hope to see this primary care network do is not, launch 2 or 3 or 4 trials, launch a whole variety of studies that come from across all the institutes and centers. This is a collaborative activity of all of us that brings in 20 or 30 trials that can be offered to these communities, and they can pick which trials are most beneficial to their community. Do you see what? Because one of the things we've done wrong in our community research is say, okay, we're going to target your community for smoking cessation, or we're going to have a cancer screening thing, or, no, we want to have a whole list of things and let the community pick what research they want to do. I'm obviously talking about a big initiative that's going to cost a lot of money. And we don't have that money right now, but I can tell you we're starting the network by repurposing some of our capacity building work that we're already doing. I can tell you that members at UAB will be part of this process. So we're going to stand something up in a modest way this year and next year, and hoping for being able to expand this at some time when conditions we hope are more favorable. So thank you for that.
Yes. Monica, Tika Benvenisti, Senior Vice Dean in the School of Medicine. Wonderful talk. I'd like to follow up on your comments on the postdoctoral fellow issue. So the advisory committee brought forth their recommendations in December. It's been a lot of discussion, lots of webinars. The stipend, of course, I think is what's, the big issue on the table with a proposed very large increase. What are you thinking about in terms of, for the NIH to act? What sort of time frame? And of course, the thing that we all ask is, will the funding for the grants themselves go up to accommodate that? So anything you have to share, we'd love to hear.
So in flat funding or declining funding, which is where you can have bigger grants or fewer grants. It's only one way to do the math. There is one way we are considering, and I can put this out to you. We can be talking later and privately, because there are ways. The other issue, I'll just tell you what it is. There's also a discussion trying to keep the same amount of grants. There's also discussion as to whether funding for trainees could be moved to a lower indirect cost rate setting. So, but we understand that not having indirect costs is also a big sacrifice, a big hit to our academic communities too. So we know that's far from perfect, but there is some discussion of a mechanism that would move postdocs off of RO1 and, onto a parallel mechanism. So bottom line, you get an RO1 and then you get a supplement for your postdoc, and your RO1 has the regular indirects and your supplement has a much lower indirect for the postdoc. See what I mean? So we're trying all kinds of creative things like that, and I'd love to, when we meet, we'll talk more about what might work.
Yes.
Hi, great talk. Great to have you here. I'm Jim Cimino, Chairman of the Department of Biomedical Informatics and Data Science, former Director of the Laboratory of Informatics Development at the Clinical Center. So I hear everything about data that you talk about, and you were talking, it sounded like you talked about increasing access to data, but decreasing documentation burden and having some pilot projects. Could you say a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so we have an effort right now that is across the entire Health and Human Services, all agencies. So it's a collaborative effort. I actually started this work long before I got to NIH. It's a collaborative effort across FDA, CMS, CDC, the Office of the National Coordinator, and us right now. where we are developing standards and provenance level specifications for the electronic health record that allow us to do research using the EHR that are with an absolute demand that they be incredibly low burden or no increased burden. I don't need to tell all of you that the EHR could be radically configured to be so much better than it is now. But like, who's going to take that step and do it? You know, who's going to develop those specifications to make it happen? We're going to try to make it happen across all of HHS and put this out through the Office of the National Coordinator. So the pilots that are underway, one pilot is completely redoing the SEER registry. I don't know if those of you participate in SEER. SEER registry, it costs us $90 million a year. It delivers data that is 3.5 years late. You know, we still don't have data from the pandemic era for SEER, for cancer status, because it's 3.5 years before the SEER data shows up. I mean, it's just absurd. So we're totally changing the SEER data. And we also have a data initiative going with FDA on post-market studies. You know, what happens when all of a sudden we have GLP-1 agonists in the world? What happens to all the rest of things, you know, that kind of data collection. But it's going to take a radical restructuring of the way the electronic health record pulls in data.
We'll give the last question to Dr. Boyd.
Yeah.
Well, that's very nice. Monica, I want to thank you for being here today. It's a great honor, privilege to have you. You're probably the busiest person I know because if you think about your extraordinary duties, you're the leader of all the biomedical research and the behavioral sciences in the world. So I think it's a pretty challenging thing. I want you to tell us, please, if you can, you have an assembly of probably some of the best minds in the world, if you bring them in from all 50 states, and you have access at your fingertips to project which is the next paradigm we need to conquer in cancer research. Now, we've gone through these fabulous monoclonals we have today, and we've touched breast, colorectal, we've touched ovarian, we've touched even lung, melanoma, and sarcoma, which I just really would not believe when those trials started, you would have these kind of outcomes. It's spectacular.
Yeah.
What is the next paradigm do you think your scientists are going to want to move on those grants that you showed us on the board today?
Well, so, I mean, you described so many areas that, so first, you touch on a whole bunch of areas that have initial great promise that still need to be pursued. I mean, those areas aren't done, you know, better, faster, more. I mean, just look at what's happened to immunotherapy and look at what's happened to our understanding of immunology across all the different diseases, not, you know, certainly not just cancer, but you know, now really deep investigations in areas of Alzheimer's and, you know, even believe it or not, obesity, immunology and its effects on things like obesity. So any one of those disciplines and any one of those abilities to modulate a biological system through an antibody, through a gene, now we have CRISPR-Cas9 plus other ways of introducing, you know, genetic changes. We have cell-based approaches. All of these things have great promise and need to be further pursued. You know, new areas. One that's caught my imagination are these little tiny nanoproteins that are now being used for drug discovery. You know, and we now have AlphaFold. We can do amazing things with being able to bring proteins together, and we can introduce into an AlphaFold algorithm these little tiny nanoproteins that can be target-seeking mechanisms. We have yet to see that start deliver therapeutics, but boy, that stuff is really cool. You know, we have the cryo-EM that can now allow us to analyze not only structures, but the dynamic nature of structures. And so I expect to see some really amazing new therapeutic approaches come out of both the little nanoparticles and in combination probably with cryo-EM. But that's just two. There's a lot of really creative, exciting new things out there. I could sit up here all day and talk about the really cool science, which we will continue. But I just have to also say, let's make sure it gets to people, because I think we haven't done that enough.
Well, Monica, thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
It's a fantastic start to, I know it's going to be a
Thank you.
very busy
Good to
day.
see you all. Okay. All right, thank you. That was great. That was really fun. I love the questions, because then I can really talk about the stuff I don't have to throw in the talk. This is great.
I suspect a lot of people will want to say hi.
Yeah, no, this is great. It's so nice to meet you.
Yes.
Yeah.
It really resonated, and I'm sure a lot of people did with your